She looked at the woman waiting by the hostess stand and saw a problem. She saw natural hair. She saw melanin. She saw a woman in a coat that, to her trained eye for luxury, didn't belong in a place like Hargrove's. What Victoria Sloan, the general manager of one of Chicago's most celebrated fine dining establishments, did not see was the Silver Eagle insignia that Colonel Nadia Osei-Thornton had earned over 22 years of service to the United States Army. She didn't see the 2 combat deployments to Iraq, or the Pentagon briefings, or the Medal of Commendation that sat in a velvet box on a shelf in Nadia's home office. Victoria Sloan saw a woman who didn't look like the clientele she'd spent 12 years curating, and she decided to act on what she saw. That decision would cost her everything. The evening of March 14th was unseasonably cold for Chicago, even by Chicago's standards. The wind off Lake Michigan had a particular cruelty that night, slicing through wool coats and rattling the bare elm branches lining Michigan Avenue. Colonel Nadia Osei-Thornton, 48, walked toward the entrance of Hargrove's at precisely 7:52 p.m., 8 minutes early for her reservation. She was dressed in a charcoal cashmere coat, tailored slacks, and low heels. Her hair was natural, pulled back into a neat, elegant twist. She wore simple gold earrings and carried a small clutch. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman of considerable accomplishment who was not trying to impress anyone. The reservation had been made 3 weeks in advance. It was her parents' 55th wedding anniversary. Her father, Kwame Osei-Thornton, 79, had spent 40 years as a civil engineer who had quietly helped rebuild infrastructure in 3 American cities. Her mother, Ruth, 76, had taught elementary school for 3 decades in the South Side. They had never eaten at a restaurant like Hargrove's. That was the point. Nadia had specifically chosen this evening, specifically chosen this restaurant, and specifically arranged for a private dining alcove and a custom menu consultation. She had confirmed the reservation twice that week. The hostess stand was manned by a young woman in all black who smiled the way people smile when they're told to smile. Nadia approached. "Good evening. I have a reservation for Osei-Thornton. Party of 6 at 8 o'clock. The young hostess typed something, frowned, typed again. "I'm seeing the reservation, but I want to just double-check with our manager. One moment." Nadia nodded. She was a patient woman. Patience was a skill she had honed in places where impatience got people killed. Victoria Sloan emerged from the back corridor approximately 90 seconds later. She was a tall woman in her mid-50s, blonde hair shellacked into place, wearing the kind of fitted blazer that suggested she took her authority very seriously. She walked with the measured pace of someone who had spent years performing competence and had eventually mistaken the performance for the real thing. Sloan looked at Nadia. Her eyes moved as they always did, with the efficiency of a woman who had built a mental taxonomy of who belonged in her restaurant and who didn't. "Ms. Osei-Thornton?" The slight pause before the name. The careful neutrality of tone that wasn't neutral at all. "That's right. I'm Victoria Sloan, the general manager. I'm afraid there's been a complication with your reservation this evening." Nadia kept her expression still. Her internal threat assessment moved from green to amber. "What kind of complication?" "We had a private event booking that expanded unexpectedly, and your alcove has been absorbed into that arrangement. Unfortunately, we're fully committed tonight." "I confirmed this reservation on Tuesday," Nadia said. Her voice was even, clear, without heat. It was the voice she used when she needed to be heard. "I spoke with someone named Marcus. He confirmed the alcove, the custom menu, and the party of 6. Sloan smiled the smile of someone who has prepared this performance many times. "I completely understand your frustration, and I can see that there was a reservation on file. But I'm afraid the situation is beyond what we're able to accommodate this evening. We'd be happy to reschedule you for." "My parents' anniversary is tonight," Nadia said. "My parents are 79 and 76 years old. They are standing outside right now with my 2 brothers and my sister-in-law because I asked them to wait while I confirmed everything was in order. I made this reservation 3 weeks ago. I confirmed it twice. The fact that your event expanded is an operational failure on this restaurant's part, not on mine." Sloan's expression didn't waver. This was the tell. A genuinely apologetic person's face would have registered something, discomfort, shame, even the micro-expression of a wince. Sloan registered nothing because she wasn't sorry. She was executing a decision she'd already made. I understand this is disappointing. I can offer you a referral to sister restaurants that might be able to offer tables available tonight, Nadia asked. A fractional pause. We're quite full. That's not what I asked. The lobby behind Nadia was quiet enough that a couple sitting near the bar had begun watching with the polite, careful attention of people who know they're witnessing something. Sloane lowered her voice, not because she was being discreet, because she wanted Nadia to understand that this was now a private conversation between a person with power and a person without it. Ms. Osei-Thornton, I have been managing this establishment for 12 years. I make decisions about the dining room every evening based on the experience we provide to all of our guests. Tonight, I am telling you that I am not able to accommodate your party. I would appreciate it if you would accept that with grace. That last sentence was a blade dressed as a courtesy. Nadia looked at Victoria Sloane for a long moment, not with anger, with the calibrated assessment of a person who has spent 2 decades making decisions about threats in environments where being wrong meant soldiers died. She recognized what was in front of her. She had encountered it before, in budget meetings, in Pentagon corridors, in a forward operating base in Mosul, where a contractor had once questioned whether she was actually authorized to be where she was standing. I'm going to step outside and bring my parents in out of the cold, Nadia said quietly. And then I'm going to make a phone call. Sloane nodded, already turning away. Please do enjoy your evening elsewhere. Nadia pushed through the heavy glass door and walked to where her family stood clustered near the entrance, her father's arm around her mother, their breath visible in the frozen air. Her brother Marcus, 44, saw her face immediately. What happened? Change of plans, Nadia said. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. Give me 2 minutes. She didn't call a competing restaurant. She didn't call a car service. She called Brigadier General Howard Fitch, who sat on the board of the Hargrove Group, the hospitality corporation that owned 11 restaurants including Hargrove Chicago. Fitch had served under Nadia in Iraq in 2009. He was the kind of man who answered calls at 8 p.m. on a Friday. He picked up on the second ring. Colonel. Howard, I need to tell you about an experience I just had at your Chicago location. Inside the restaurant, Victoria Sloane had returned to her office, which overlooked the dining room through a discreet interior window. She watched her hostess station with the satisfied attention of someone who had successfully defended her territory. There were, she noted to herself, 4 open tables in the main dining room. 2 of them had been empty all evening. The event that had expanded was a birthday party for a city alderman that occupied the private room in the back, a room that was entirely separate from the main dining area and from the alcove that had been reserved by the Osei-Thornton party. Sloane knew this. She had known it when she walked out of the hostess stand. The alcove had not been absorbed by anything. She had simply looked at a woman and made a decision. She was doing paperwork when, 40 minutes later, the door to her office opened without a knock. It was not uncommon for staff to enter without knocking. What was uncommon was the man who entered first, Marcus Webb, the regional director of the Hargrove Group, who was based in New York, and whom Sloane had not seen in person in 7 months. What was more uncommon was that Marcus Webb did not look happy. What was most uncommon was the woman who walked in behind him. Nadia Osei-Thornton had brought her parents inside after all. They were seated at a table in the main dining room, one of the tables that had been empty all evening, attended by a server who had been told by the regional director himself that this was the most important table in the restaurant tonight. Her brothers were with them. Her mother was looking at the menu with the careful delight of someone seeing something extraordinary. Nadia herself was in this office. She had not raised her voice. She had not posted anything on social media. She had made 1 phone call, explained the situation in precise, dispassionate language, and waited. Sloane stood behind her desk. Marcus, I can explain. I've seen the reservation log, Webb said. He set a printed document on her desk. I've spoken to the hostess. I've reviewed the floor plan for this evening. The alcove was available. The private event did not expand. He said each sentence the way a surgeon might remove something. Cleanly, without unnecessary motion. I'd like to hear your explanation for what you told Ms. Osei-Thornton. Sloane opened her mouth, closed it. I also want to be very clear about who Ms. Osei-Thornton is, Webb continued. He was not raising his voice either. Neither of them were. Raised voices would have been easier. Because when she called General Fitch and General Fitch called our CEO and our CEO called me, I was given a biography that I think you should be aware of." He placed a second sheet on the desk. "Colonel Nadia Osei-Thornton has served 22 years in the United States Army. She is currently the senior military liaison to the Department of Homeland Security. She holds a security clearance that I am not authorized to fully understand. She has been awarded the Legion of Merit and the Bronze Star. She has testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. She is also a personal friend of our company's largest private investor, who, I am told, is currently on the phone with our chairman." Sloane stared at the sheet. Her face had done something unfamiliar. It had gone slack. "I turned away a decorated combat colonel on the anniversary of her parents' 55-year marriage," she said. "It came out as a statement because that's what it was." "You did," Webb said, "and I need to understand why." The silence in the room was the worst kind. It was the silence of a person confronting something they have successfully avoided confronting for a very long time. "I made a judgment call," Sloane said finally, "about the evening service." "Based on what?" She didn't answer, because the answer was sitting at a table in her dining room eating the best meal they had served all week. Nadia did not attend the meeting in Sloane's office. She was at the table with her parents, watching her father cut into a seared duck breast with the focused pleasure of a man who had spent 40 years making sure other people had everything they needed and was finally being given something that had been assembled entirely for him. Her mother was explaining the tasting menu to her sister-in-law as if she were teaching a lesson, which was, Nadia understood, how her mother processed joy. "This is unbelievable," her brother Marcus said, swirling his wine. He looked at Nadia. "You want to tell me what actually happened?" "Later," Nadia said. "You called in a general?" "I called a friend." "Who happened to be a general?" "Most of my friends happen to be generals," Nadia said, and took a sip of water. Her father looked up from his plate. At 79, Kwame Osei-Thornton had the eyes of a man who had seen nearly everything and had made peace with most of it. He looked at his daughter with a kind of steady recognition. "Something happened when you went in first." "It's handled, Dad." "Did someone try to turn us away?" Nadia held his gaze. There was no point in the performance of protection with this man. He had raised her to understand the world accurately, not comfortably. "Yes." He nodded once. He set down his fork. He looked at the table, the white linen, the crystal, the small arrangement of white roses that had been placed there by a server who had been told they were celebrating an anniversary. He looked at the room, which was warm and candlelit and full of the low murmur of a fine evening in progress. Then he looked at Nadia. "But we're here," he said. "We're here," she said. He picked up his fork and went back to his duck. Victoria Sloane resigned the following Monday morning. The resignation was described in the internal company communication as mutual and amicable. It was neither. She had been given the choice between resignation and termination. And termination came with a formal HR investigation and a documented record of the incident, a record that would be available to any future employer in the hospitality industry conducting due diligence. She chose resignation. It felt like choosing a window over a door until she realized they were both exits from the same burning building. The story did not stay internal for long. The hostess, a 23-year-old woman named Patrice, who had been quietly horrified throughout the original interaction, told a friend. The friend told someone who worked in food media. By Wednesday, a short item had appeared in a Chicago dining newsletter with enough specificity that anyone in the industry knew exactly which restaurant and which manager it described. By Thursday, it had been picked up by a national food publication. By Friday, Nadia's name had been confirmed by 2 sources, and the story had moved beyond dining into news. Colonel Nadia Osei-Thornton gave one statement. She issued it through her publicists, because she had a publicist, which was itself a detail that seemed to recalibrate people's expectations of who she was. And it read, in its entirety, "I was with my family celebrating my parents' 55th wedding anniversary. We had a wonderful evening. I hope this conversation is useful to someone." It was useful to approximately 4 million people, which was the number of times the statement was shared in its first 48 hours. The comments section beneath every article told a particular kind of story. There were people who said they had experienced the same thing at Hargroves. There were people who said they had experienced the same thing everywhere. There were people who asked, as they always do, whether it was really about race or whether it was something else. And there were people who answered that question, with the patience of those who've been answering it their entire lives. One comment, from a woman who identified herself as a retired schoolteacher from Birmingham, received more than 12,000 likes. It read, "The part that stays with me isn't that she was a colonel, it's that it shouldn't have mattered. She was a woman with a reservation and a family waiting in the cold. That should have been enough." The Hargrove Group released a statement expressing commitment to inclusion and announcing a review of their host and service training protocols. Their CEO, in a separate interview, described the incident as a profound failure of our values. He did not mention that the review had been initiated largely because Nadia Osei-Thornton's phone call had reached his chairman within 40 minutes of the original incident, or that the chairman had called him before he'd even sat down to dinner that night. The optics of a decorated military officer being turned away from your restaurant by a manager who couldn't articulate a coherent reason were, as the CEO put it to his communications team, not something the brand could absorb quietly. Victoria Sloan spent 3 months applying for positions in restaurant management. She had 12 years of strong performance reviews, impressive revenue figures, and a reputation in the industry that had, until March 14th, been genuinely solid. She received 4 interviews. 3 of them ended after the hiring manager ran her name through a standard search and found the articles. The 4th interview ended when the owner of the restaurant, a woman who had emigrated from Nigeria 30 years earlier and built her establishment from nothing, recognized the name on the resume, set it down on the desk and said, "I think we're done here." Sloan eventually found work as an event coordinator for a mid-sized corporate catering company. She was good at logistics, the part she had never actually been good at. Reading people, understanding hospitality in the true sense of the word, the radical act of making strangers feel welcome. That part had always been theatre. Now there was no audience. Nadia Osei-Thornton did not follow any of this. She had an actual job, which consumed most of her hours, and the life that did not have room for tracking the consequences visited upon a woman who had tried to ruin her parents' anniversary. What she did do, 2 months after the incident, was give a commencement address at her alma mater, Spelman College, in which she told the graduating class something she had been thinking about since that night in March. You will encounter people in your life who look at you and make an immediate determination about your worth, she said. She was standing at a podium in full dress uniform, her medals catching the afternoon Georgia light. They will base that determination on things that have nothing to do with who you are or what you've built. And in that moment, you will have a choice. You can perform your credentials. You can justify your presence. You can prove yourself to someone who has already decided not to be convinced. She paused. The auditorium was very quiet. Or you can understand that their determination is a reflection of their limitations and not your value. You can make one phone call. You can bring your family in out of the cold. And you can sit down to dinner. Another pause. The table was always yours. Some people just needed to be reminded of that. The address was recorded by several people in the audience. By the next morning, the clip had 3 million views. Victoria Sloan watched it alone in her apartment on a Tuesday night. She watched it twice. She did not post a comment. There was nothing to say that the silence hadn't already said. Kwame and Ruth Osei-Thornton celebrated their 55th anniversary at Hargrove's, Chicago, at a table by the window that overlooked Michigan Avenue. Ruth had the salmon. Kwame had the duck. They shared a dessert, which was something they had done at every restaurant for 55 years. When the server brought a small cake with a candle, Kwame looked at his daughter across the table and did something his family had rarely seen him do in the formal, composed manner of his public life. He laughed, a full, uncomplicated, grateful laugh. Ruth reached over and took his hand. Nadia watched her parents in that candlelight and thought about what it costs a person to carry themselves with dignity through a world that keeps asking them to justify their right to be somewhere. She thought about all the evenings her father had walked into rooms where he was not expected, not welcomed, and had built things in those rooms anyway. She thought about her mother teaching children who were told, implicitly and explicitly, that the world was not designed for them and teaching them anyway. She thought about what it meant to have a daughter who could make one phone call and move the mountain. She thought, this is what it was all for. Not the medals, Not the briefings, not the clearances or the commendations or the Senate testimony. This, 4 people at a table by a window, a shared dessert, a candle, an ordinary miracle, which is the only kind that matters. There is a version of this story where it ends when the phone call is made and the manager is escorted from her office. That version is satisfying. That version gives us the clean, bright satisfaction of watching power redirected, of watching someone who used authority as a weapon find that weapon turned back toward them. That version is real, and it happened, and there is nothing wrong with finding comfort in it. But the version that matters, the one that should stay with you, is what Nadia Osei-Thornton did not do. She did not perform her rank for Victoria Sloan. She did not explain her medals or her deployments or her clearance level. She was a woman with a reservation and a family waiting in the cold, and those things should have been sufficient. They were not sufficient to Sloan. They were sufficient to every decent person who heard the story afterward, and the quiet, difficult truth at the center of it is that they would have been sufficient to Nadia regardless of what anyone else decided. She did not need Sloan's recognition to know what she was worth. She had known that long before she had the rank to prove it. The table was always hers. Sloan just needed to be reminded of that in the most comprehensive and permanent way possible. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that dignity is not granted by the rooms we're let into but carried in by the people who walk through the door, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Echoes of Justice. There are more stories where this one came from, and every single one of them is a reminder that what goes around has a way of finding its way back. I keep coming back to the moment Colonel Osei-Thornton set down his fork, looked across that candlelit table at his daughter, and said, "But we're here. Not triumphant. Not bitter. Just that." 4 words that held 55 years of knowing exactly how the world works and choosing, every single day, to show up in it anyway. That's the thing about this story that I can't shake. Victoria Sloan walked out to that hostess stand having already made her decision. She looked at a woman and concluded in the space of a second that the woman didn't belong. And what Sloan never understood, what people like her never understand, is that the decision doesn't reveal anything about the person being judged. It reveals everything about the person doing the judging. What destroyed Sloan wasn't the phone call Nadia made. It wasn't General Fitch or the regional director or the chairman. What destroyed Sloan was a pattern of behavior she had never been forced to examine, operating unchecked for years, finally meeting a moment it couldn't survive. That's how these things work. The consequences don't come from outside, they come from the inside, from choices that compound quietly until one night, in a restaurant lobby, they walk right up and introduce themselves. I think about what it takes to do what Nadia did, not the phone call. That part was easy, relatively speaking. I mean the part before that, standing in a lobby where someone is actively telling you that you don't belong, and not performing your credentials, not raising your voice, not giving them the satisfaction of your anger. Just saying, calmly, "I'm going to step outside and bring my family in out of the cold, and then I'm going to make a phone call." That kind of composure isn't something you wake up with. It's something you build over years of choosing, in places far harder than a Chicago restaurant lobby, to keep your integrity intact when it would be so much easier to lose it. There's a word I keep reaching for, not intelligence exactly, though Nadia is clearly intelligent, something more like clarity. The ability to see a situation accurately, without the distortion of ego or panic, and to act from that clear-eyed place instead of from the noise. She knew what Sloan was doing. She knew why. She didn't need Sloan to admit it. She just needed to make one call. And then there's the part that most people skip over in stories like this. What she did with the outcome. She didn't hold it. She didn't perform her victory. She sat down with her parents and watched her father eat duck and her mother explain a tasting menu like it was a lesson plan. She let the evening be what it was supposed to be. That's not a small thing. The ability to let justice work and then put it down, to not let what was done to you become the defining fact of your evening. That takes a kind of inner strength that doesn't get nearly enough credit. What Kwame and Ruth built over 55 years, the children they raised, the work they did, the quiet persistence of showing up with dignity in a world that didn't always extend it. That is the story. Nadia is the result of that story. And Victoria Sloan, sitting alone in her apartment watching a commencement address on a Tuesday night, is the result of a different kind of story. One built on assumption instead of substance, on the performance of authority instead of the real thing. The table was always theirs. That's the part worth remembering.